Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Picture, standing in a muddy trench wearing the uniform of the French Republic.
Right, the army that had just swept across Europe.
Yeah, tearing down monarchies in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But as you look up at the stone walls of the fortress you are besieging, the people firing cannons down at you are enslaved Africans.
And, the truly disorienting part of that scene, from the walls of that fortress, those formerly enslaved fighters are singing the songs of your revolution.
They are belting out the French revolutionary anthems about the rights of man. And you, the Republican soldier, are under orders to force them back into chains.
It is a scene that just completely shatters the neat, orderly historical narratives we're so accustomed to. I mean, when we examine the late 18th century, the era of the Enlightenment, we frequently encounter this intellectual disconnect.
Whoa, for sure.
And the Haitian Revolution forces us to confront that disconnect head on. So this deep dive is an integral part of our History of Slavery series, and it focuses on an event that fundamentally broke the colonial framework.
We are looking at the only known slave rebellion in human history that successfully led to the founding of a free state ruled by former captives.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Between 1791 and 1804, Saint-Domingue, which was this incredibly profitable, ruthlessly efficient French colony, transformed into the independent nation of Haiti.
Which is just a staggering historical pivot.
It really is. So for you listening, we are going to tear down the mechanics of how this actually happened, how an enslaved population systematically denied access to weapons, education, and basic human rights managed to outmaneuver the local planter class.
And not just them, but the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, and ultimately a veteran expeditionary force sent by Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah. It's wild. But we have to move beyond just a simple timeline of events here.
Right. The objective is to understand the underlying mechanisms, like why this eruption occurred in Saint-Domingue and how the reverberations altered the global order.
Because the conditions in that colony were this singular combination of staggering economic output, unspeakable cruelty, and profound philosophical hypocrisy.
Yeah. To comprehend the revolution, we really first have to understand the horrifying efficiency of the machine that was Saint-Domingue.
Let us start with the economics. Because to a modern listener, the scale of wealth generated by this single island might be a little difficult to grasp.
Oh, it was astronomical.
We are not talking about a moderately successful trading post. By 1789, Saint-Domingue was producing 60% of the world's coffee and 40% of the sugar imported by France and Britain.
And to contextualize that economic weight, the value of the exports leaving Saint-Domingue was roughly equivalent to all the commodities shipped from the entire 13 colonies to Great Britain combined.
Wait, all 13 colonies?
Combined, yeah. You had an average of 600 ships traversing the Atlantic every single year just between Saint-Domingue and the French port of Bordeaux.
That is just an enormous volume of trade.
It was. The entire French economy was deeply tethered to this output. I mean, of the 25 million people living in France at the time, the livelihoods of at least 1 million depended directly on the colonial trade.
With millions more benefiting indirectly, of course.
Right.
So to put it in modern terms, to be a wealthy planter, a Grand Blanc in Saint-Domingue was akin to being, a titan of industry today.
Absolutely. They were sitting at the apex of global commerce.
But that wealth rested on a demographic structure that was incredibly volatile. Let's look at the numbers.
Right. By 1789, you had roughly 40,000 white colonists, 28,000 free people of color, the gens de couleur libre, and an estimated 452,000 enslaved Africans.
That is greater than a 10-to-1 ratio of enslaved people to white colonists.
It is. And even combining the entire free population, white and people of color, the enslaved population possessed an overwhelming numerical advantage.
And the colonial elite had to be profoundly aware of this demographic reality, right?
Oh, they were. And their response was not to ameliorate conditions, but to implement a system of terror.
Yeah, the sources outline an economic calculation that is just chilling in its pragmatism. The mortality rate on the plantations was catastrophic.
It was. Between the prevalence of tropical diseases like yellow fever and the lethal exhaustion of the sugar harvests, 50% of enslaved people brought from Africa died within 1 year of arrival.
50% in year one. That is a coin flip on human life.
Because the mechanism of sugar production itself was lethal. It required grueling manual labor in sweltering heat, cutting dense cane, transporting it, feeding it into crushing mills.
And often working straight through the night, right?
Yes. The boiling houses where the sugar was crystallized were essentially ovens, leading to severe burns and exhaustion. but the planters had run the numbers.
And what did the numbers tell them?
They calculated that it was cheaper to import new captives from West Africa, extract maximum labor from them on absolute minimum rations, and just let them die, rather than spend the capital required to sustain a healthy, reproducing workforce.
I just struggle to understand how an entire society operates on the premise of deliberately consuming its workforce. It is like an unregulated extraction industry, but the fuel being burned is human life.
That is a very accurate way to put it.
Did the planters simply ignore the long-term instability of this model?
They accepted the instability as the cost of doing business. And this ruthlessly utilitarian approach completely warped the social fabric of the enslaved population.
How so?
Well, for instance, because the male mortality rate was disproportionately high, men being subjected to the most physically destructive labor polyandry developed as a common social structure.
Where one woman would be married to several men simultaneously.
Right. It was a desperate adaptation to a system that continuously eradicated human life.
And the terror flowed upward as well.
Mhm.
I mean, the historian Paul Fregosi described Saint-Domingue as a place where every distinct class harbored a deep, venomous hatred for the others.
The caste system was incredibly rigid and perpetually hostile. You had the Grand Blancs, the wealthy plantation owners who despised the Petit Blancs, the poor white merchants and artisans.
Right.
Then the locally born whites resented the French administrator sent from Paris. The free people of color, who often owned plantations and slaves themselves, envied the political power of the whites while actively despising the enslaved black population.
It's a complete mess of resentments.
It is, and the white population, regardless of class, viewed the free people of color with intense suspicion and passed legislation to restrict their civil rights.
So everyone is trapped in a pressure cooker. But let us look at the 452,000 enslaved people.
Yeah.
The sources indicate that because they were constantly dying and being replaced, 2/3 of the enslaved population in 1789 were African-born.
Yes.
They weren't generations removed from their homeland.
And that is a critical factor in understanding the organization of the revolution. They were primarily Yoruba from modern-day Nigeria, Fon from modern Benin, and heavily Congolese, making up about 40% of the population.
Oh.
So because of this constant influx of newly captured people, they retain their languages, their martial traditions, and their spiritual practices.
This brings us to Vodou. Historically, it is often mischaracterized, but in the context of Saint-Domingue, Vodou seems to function as much more than just a religious practice.
Right.
It looks like a clandestine communication network. How did that actually operate under the surveillance of the overseers?
Well, Vodou is a syncretic belief system, blending elements of Catholicism, which the planters forced upon them, with various West African spiritual traditions.
Right, blending the two.
But practically speaking, it provided a unified cultural space. When you have enslaved people from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds forced together, Vodou ceremonies became the venue where they could communicate, forge alliances, and establish a command structure that was entirely invisible to the white colonists.
So the planters just saw slaves singing and dancing.
Yes, but the enslaved people were actually conducting political and spiritual organizing that inherently rejected their enslavement.
Okay, so we have an overwhelmingly African-born population possessing an invisible network of communication, trapped in a system that is literally working them to death.
Correct.
And then the intellectual shock waves of the Enlightenment hit this volatile environment.
The 1789 French Revolution was the catalyst. The publication of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in Paris sent shockwaves across the Atlantic.
Because it boldly declared that all men are born and remain free and equal in rights.
Right. However, the Enlightenment thinkers largely sidestepped the glaring hypocrisy of their colonial economy. They discussed liberty in Parisian salons while their wealth was derived from human bondage in the Caribbean.
Though a few intellectuals did see the inevitable conclusion. The French writer Guillaume Renaud published critiques of colonialism, predicting that the Africans only needed a courageous chief to rise up and orchestrate their vengeance.
He recognized the mathematical impossibility of maintaining the colony indefinitely.
The numbers just didn't work.
No. But the local factions in Saint-Domingue, they saw the French Revolution not as a moral awakening, but as a political opportunity.
The wealthy Grands Blancs saw a chance to secure autonomy from France.
Right, allowing them to trade directly with the United States and Britain without royal taxation.
But the free people of color read that same Declaration of the Rights of Man and saw a mandate for their own civil equality. which leads to the uprising of Vincent Ogé in October 1790.
Ogé was a wealthy, educated, free man of color, and it is vital to note that he did not instigate a slave rebellion. He explicitly sought voting rights and equal civil status for free men of color, many of whom were slave owners themselves.
Okay.
He traveled to Paris, purchased arms, and returned to Saint-Domingue to press his demands.
But the colonial governor refused, and Ogé's armed demonstration was quickly crushed. And the colonial authorities did not just execute him, they subjected him to being broken on the wheel. For listeners who might not know, this was a medieval form of torture where the victim was tied to a wagon wheel, and their bones were systematically shattered with an iron bar before they were left to die of exposure or eventually beheaded.
It was a theatrical display of terror.
Really gruesome.
It was a very deliberate message from the white establishment. They were demonstrating the absolute brutal limits of reform. But the public torture of Ogé backfired.
Because it alienated the free people of color completely, proving that the white planters would never willingly share power.
Right. And meanwhile, the enslaved Africans were observing all of this.
Right, because if the white planters achieved independence from France, as they wanted, it would mean even worse conditions for the enslaved. The planters would be entirely unrestrained by the French king's Code Noir.
Yes, the Code Noir, enacted in 1685, was a decree outlining the conditions of slavery in the French Empire.
On paper, it required planters to provide minimum rations, clothing, and prohibited the most extreme forms of torture.
But in reality, the planters in Saint-Domingue treated the Code Noir with absolute contempt. They ignored the provisions for sustenance and routinely employed horrific torture.
So the enslaved population understood that a planter-led independent state would eradicate even the theoretical protections of French law.
Precisely. And resistance was not a new concept to the enslaved population. The sources detail the legacy of Francois McCandle decades earlier.
Tell us about him.
McCandle was a Maroon leader. Now, Maroon is a term for enslaved people who had escaped the plantations and formed self-sustaining communities in the rugged, mountainous interior of the island.
Which required incredible resilience.
Oh, definitely. They relied on foraging, subsistence farming, and coordinated raids on lowland plantations for supplies.
And in the 1750s, McCandle used his knowledge of African botany and traditions to build a vast network among the plantation slaves.
He distributed poisons to enslaved domestic workers, orchestrating a campaign that killed hundreds of white colonists and livestock.
McCandle's rebellion terrified the planters because it infiltrated their homes.
Right. He was captured and burned at the stake in 1758, but the organizational blueprint he created, a clandestine network spanning multiple plantations, unified by spiritual authority, remained intact, dormant, but ready.
Which sets the stage for the emergence of figures like Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint is often described as an enlightened actor, self-educated, former slave who engaged deeply with the texts of the European Enlightenment.
What is remarkable about Louverture's engagement with the Enlightenment is his pragmatism.
How so?
He did not adopt European philosophy because he believed it was intellectually superior to his African heritage. Rather, he recognized the rhetoric of liberty and the rights of man as a powerful political tool. He learned the language of his oppressors in order to dismantle their system from within.
That is so strategic. The Count Mirabeau famously stated that the white colonists in Saint-Domingue slept at the foot of Vesuvius. It is a striking analogy.
Yes.
How did these educated, wealthy planters fail to hear the rumblings?
They were incapacitated by their own systemic racism. They possessed a deep-seated ideological conviction that Africans were inherently incapable of sophisticated organization or military strategy.
They just couldn't believe it was possible.
No, they believed their regime of extreme physical terror was sufficient to prevent large-scale coordination. They could not conceive that the people they were brutalizing were simultaneously monitoring the political fracturing of the colonial elite and preparing to strike.
Okay, let's explore the moment Vesuvius finally erupts. We move from the philosophical debates and isolated uprisings to a literal storm in August 1791.
This brings us to the gathering at Bois Cayman on the night of August 14th. This is a moment of profound historical gravity.
Yeah.
A clandestine voodoo ceremony was held in a densely wooded area. A severe tropical storm was passing over the region.
The environment alone must have provided intense psychological momentum. The lightning, the thunder, the rain, all of it was interpreted as auspicious, powerful omens by the participants.
The ceremony was led by a high priest named Duddy Boukman and a priestess named Cecile Fatiman.
And in that charged atmosphere, Boukman delivered an invocation, calling upon the spiritual forces to assist in their liberation, contrasting their benevolent deities with the cruel, avaricious god of the white colonists.
It was at this ceremony that the final signal for a coordinated general insurrection was given.
Exactly 1 week later, on the night of August 21st, the violence commenced, and the speed with which it spread is staggering.
Within mere weeks, 100,000 enslaved people had risen up, seizing control of the entire northern province.
And the retribution was apocalyptic. The enslaved population, subjected to unimaginable trauma for so long, unleashed their fury upon the physical infrastructure of their oppression.
They systematically burned the fields, dismantled the boiling houses, and destroyed the machinery of the plantations.
The sources outline the scale of the devastation. At least 900 coffee plantations and 180 sugar plantations were annihilated.
Thousands of white colonists were killed, and the violence was intimate and brutal. Heads were placed on pikes. Homes were reduced to ash.
We must approach this history with an impartial lens regarding the violence. But it was a war of mutual extermination from the outset.
It was. The surviving white colonists who managed to flee to the fortified coastal cities quickly mobilized heavily armed militias.
And they retaliated.
With indiscriminate slaughter, yes. Executing roughly 15,000 black people, often targeting those who had not even participated in the initial uprising.
In the midst of this chaotic destruction, the demands of the rebel leaders reveal a fascinating strategic complexity, because they were not immediately demanding the creation of an independent Haitian state.
What's fascinating here is how the rebel leadership utilized the political confusion in France. A rumor had circulated among the enslaved population that the French king had recently issued a decree granting them 3 free days a week and prohibiting the use of the whip, but that the local planters were treasonously hiding this decree.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the rebels initially framed their uprising not as a rejection of French authority, but as a loyalist action to enforce the king's will against rebellious white masters.
So they were weaponizing the legal authority of the empire against the local managers of that empire.
Yes.
And this strategy wasn't confined to the north. In the southern part of the colony, a leader named Romain Le Prophetess gathered an army of 13,000 troops.
Romain Le Prophetess controlled major urban centers like Léogâne and Jacmel. This demonstrates that the rebellion was not isolated, it was a colony-wide phenomenon.
Right.
By early 1792, the rebels effectively controlled a third of Saint-Domingue.
And the authorities in Paris were looking at the potential loss of their most lucrative asset.
Naturally.
To try and stabilize the situation, the French National Assembly dispatched 6,000 soldiers and granted full political rights to the free people of color, hoping to create an alliance between the whites and the free people of color against the enslaved rebels.
But the internal dynamics of Saint-Domingue were quickly overshadowed by events in Europe, because in early 1793, the French revolutionary government executed King Louis XVI.
Right, which is a massive escalation.
This radical escalation triggered declarations of war from Great Britain and Spain. Suddenly, the slave rebellion in Saint-Domingue became the focal point of a global imperial war.
Both Britain and Spain see the chaos in Saint-Domingue and decide it is the perfect time to invade.
It was entirely opportunistic. Spain, which controlled the eastern two-thirds of the island modern-day Dominican Republic, crossed the border, providing arms and ammunition to the enslaved rebels to destabilize the French forces.
And Great Britain, possessing the most powerful navy in the world, launched an amphibious invasion.
Yes.
The British Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger, had 2 distinct motivations. First, he wanted to seize the incredible wealth of the colony for the British Empire.
And second, he was terrified that a successful slave revolt would inspire similar uprisings in neighboring British colonies, especially Jamaica.
So Pitt initiated a strategy he termed the Great Push, dispatching an expeditionary force under General Charles Gray.
But European military doctrines were woefully inadequate for the Caribbean theater.
How so?
Well, the British forces achieved some initial coastal victories, but they rapidly disintegrated when confronted by the true defender of the island, which was the mosquito.
Yellow fever. The British troops referred to it as the Black Vomit. Can you explain why it was so utterly devastating to the European armies?
Yellow fever is a viral disease transmitted by infected mosquitoes. The European soldiers possessed zero natural immunity.
None at all.
Right. The virus attacks the liver, causing jaundice, hence the name yellow fever, and severe internal bleeding, leading to the vomiting of coagulated blood. The mortality rate in the cramped, unsanitary military camps was catastrophic.
The statistics are horrifying. The historian Sir John Fortescue noted that in 1794 alone, 12,000 British soldiers died in the West Indies, almost entirely from disease.
The British military establishment was just bleeding out. They were pouring millions of pounds and tens of thousands of lives into an invasion that was achieving nothing.
Meanwhile, the French Republican commissioners sent to govern Saint-Domingue, Léger-Félicité Sonthonax, and Etienne Polverel found themselves in an impossible predicament.
They were essentially trapped. They were facing the Spanish army pushing from the east, the British Navy blockading the coast and capturing ports, and the royalist white planters who had allied with the British to maintain the institution of slavery.
So faced with imminent defeat on all fronts, Sonthonax and Polverel utilized the only remaining strategic resource available to them, the enslaved population.
Exactly. Yes. In August and October of 1793, they issued decrees offering immediate freedom to any enslaved person who would join the French Republican Army to fight the British and the Spanish.
They effectively abolished slavery in the colony as a desperate military maneuver.
Yes.
And this local tactical decision creates a huge political ripple effect back in Europe.
It does. On February 4th, 1794, the French National Convention in Paris officially ratified this action, abolishing slavery across all French colonies and granting civil rights to all black men.
It was a monumental legal shift.
The revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality were finally applied, however cynically or pragmatically, to the colonial holdings.
And this shift in French policy immediately altered the trajectory of the war in Saint-Domingue, particularly regarding the allegiances of Toussaint Louverture.
Because up until this moment, Toussaint had been a commissioned officer fighting for the Spanish crown.
Really?
Indeed. Louverture had utilized Spanish resources to arm and train his forces, earning a high rank and even a knighthood in the Order of St. Isabella.
So he was highly embedded with the Spanish.
He was. But when the Spanish crown flatly refused to officially abolish slavery and the French Republic codified emancipation into law, Louverture recognized which power aligned with his ultimate objective.
In the spring of 1794, he executed a brilliant strategic pivot, abandoning the Spanish and bringing his highly trained army into the service of the French Republic.
It was a turning point.
I want to focus on that army for a moment. How does Toussaint Louverture build a professional military force from a population that had been deliberately starved and barred from ever holding weapons? Like, where did the guns come from, and how did they learn to fight European armies on their own terms?
That is the genius of Louverture's leadership. Initially, weapons were procured through battlefield scavenging, taking muskets from fallen French, Spanish, or British soldiers.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also established smuggling networks, trading coffee or sugar with American and Spanish merchants in exchange for gunpowder and firearms.
And the training.
He implemented draconian discipline. He recognized that the initial chaotic fury of the 1791 uprising would not defeat professional infantry. He studied European military manuals.
So he's reading up on formal tactics.
Yes. He drilled his troops relentlessly in linear tactics, loading and firing in disciplined volleys, but he combined this with the irregular guerrilla warfare native to the Maroons.
So his troops could hold a line against British infantry on open ground and then just vanish into the mountains to conduct ambushes.
It is an incredibly sophisticated synthesis of military doctrines.
With this army, Toussaint effectively becomes the dominant power on the island. He's systematically dismantling the foreign threats.
He repulsed the British incursions time and time again. By 1798, the British position was completely untenable due to disease and Louverture's relentless tactical pressure.
And British Colonel Thomas Maitland was forced to the negotiating table.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You have an officer of the British Empire, the preeminent global superpower, sitting down to negotiate terms of surrender with a self-educated former slave.
Maitland had no leverage. He agreed to evacuate all British forces from Saint-Domingue. In return, Louverture provided a guarantee that he would not export his revolution by invading neighboring Jamaica.
So Louverture achieved what the French government could not: the expulsion of the British military from the colony.
Yes, but the consolidation of power required him to fight internal enemies as well. This leads to the War of the South, a bitter civil conflict against the mulatto leader André Rigaud.
Rigaud controlled the southern peninsula and represented the interests of the free people of color, who maintained strong cultural and political ties to France.
And Louverture viewed Rigaud as a direct threat to his unified command.
And during this civil war, Louverture secures naval support from the United States government. The U.S. Navy, specifically the frigate USS General Greene, bombarded Rigaud's fortifications at Jacmel to support Louverture's siege.
Right.
Why would the United States, a nation deeply invested in the institution of slavery, support a black revolutionary army?
It was pure geopolitical pragmatism on the part of the John Adams administration. At that time, the United States was engaged in the Quasi-War, an undeclared naval conflict with France.
Right.
Rigaud was closely aligned with the French government, while Louverture was operating with increasing independence. The U.S. calculated that supporting Louverture would weaken French influence in the Caribbean and secure lucrative trading rights for American merchants in Saint-Domingue.
Louverture is playing an incredibly complex geopolitical game here. By 1801, having defeated Rigaud, he controls the entire island.
He even invades the eastern Spanish half of Hispaniola to abolish slavery there.
And then he issues a new constitution for Saint-Domingue.
The 1801 Constitution is a fascinating document. It abolishes slavery forever and declares that all men are eligible for employment regardless of color.
That's huge.
However, it also names Toussaint Louverture as governor for life, granting him near dictatorial powers.
But he doesn't declare full independence from France. Why stop there?
Because Louverture understood the precarious economic reality of the colony. Saint-Domingue produced cash crops. It did not manufacture weapons, textiles, or heavy goods.
So they needed to trade.
It needed international trade to survive, and a declaration of full independence would have invited an immediate blockade by all colonial powers. Therefore, he maintained the fiction of being a loyal French colony to keep diplomatic channels open, while operating entirely as an autonomous sovereign state.
He also implements some highly controversial domestic policies to maintain that economic output, doesn't he?
He did. Louverture knew the colony had to generate wealth to fund his army and maintain autonomy. He invited fleeing white planters to return and reclaim their lands.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh.
Yes, and more significantly, he instituted a system of forced labor. The formerly enslaved population was required to return to the plantations and work.
Even though slavery was abolished.
Right, they were paid a portion of the harvest and the whip was banned, but they were legally forbidden from leaving the plantations or choosing their own employment.
It is a harsh compromise, sacrificing absolute personal liberty for the survival of the state.
It was.
But this delicate balance of autonomous rule is entirely unacceptable to the new leader of France.
In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France, and Napoleon's vision for the French Empire was entirely incompatible with an autonomous, black-led Saint-Domingue.
He viewed Louverture's constitution as an intolerable insult to French sovereignty.
Furthermore, Napoleon required the enormous revenues of a slave-based Caribbean economy to fund his military campaigns in Europe.
So Napoleon initiates an immense counterattack. In 1802, he dispatches an enormous expeditionary force under the command of his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc.
Leclerc arrived with dozens of warships and thousands of veteran troops, and Napoleon's secret instructions to Leclerc were deeply cynical.
What were they?
He ordered Leclerc to publicly flatter Louverture, swear that France would never restore slavery, and wait until the French military presence was fully entrenched.
And then?
Once secure, Leclerc was ordered to arrest Louverture, deport the Black Officer Corps, and crush the populace into submission.
The ultimate goal being the full restoration of chattel slavery. But Louverture and his commanders anticipate the betrayal. They do not allow the French to simply disembark and take control.
Louverture recognized that he could not defeat Leclerc's vast force in conventional open-field battles. He activated a strategy of total, scorched earth resistance.
He sent explicit orders to his most ruthless general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And the orders given to Dessalines are uncompromising. He is instructed to leave absolutely nothing for the French to utilize.
Dessalines executed the strategy with terrifying efficiency. He ordered his troops to destroy the infrastructure, tear up the roads, poison the wells, and burn the cities to the foundation.
When the French army approached the city of Léogâne, Dessalines ordered it incinerated.
The French columns marched into ruined landscapes, greeted only by ashes and the decaying bodies of livestock and combatants.
This strategy of attrition forces the French to overextend their supply lines. Which brings us back to the image we started with, the Battle of Crétat-Pierrot in March 1802.
Right. Crétat-Pierrot was a British-built fort situated in a mountainous, highly defensible position. Dessalines commanded the garrison there, while Louverture maneuvered his forces in the surrounding countryside.
And Leclerc ordered 3 separate French columns to converge on the fortress and annihilate the defenders.
The sources describe a moment of incredible tension just before the French assault. Dessalines stands before his troops, positioned directly beside a huge powder magazine.
He holds a lit torch and declares that if the French manage to breach the walls, he will detonate the explosives and destroy them all.
The garrison swore they would die for liberty, and the French launched wave after wave of immense infantry assaults.
But the topography worked against them, right?
Yes, the topography required the French to advance through a deep ditch before reaching the walls. Dessalines ordered his men to hold their fire until the French infantry were completely packed into the ditch, and then unleashed a devastating, coordinated barrage of artillery and musket fire.
General after general led charges, and they were systematically cut down. And while this slaughter is occurring, the psychological warfare is deployed.
Between the volleys of gunfire, the Haitian defenders standing on the ramparts began singing the Marseillaise and the Ça ira, the anthems of the French Revolution.
They were shouting the rhetoric of equality and the rights of man down at the French soldiers. The cognitive dissonance for the French troops must have been overwhelming.
It was.
They are dying by the hundreds to suppress a people who are claiming the very political ideals that the French Republic was built upon.
It thoroughly demoralized the French rank and file. They began to openly question the morality of their mission.
The siege lasted for 20 days.
Yes, and when the garrison finally ran out of food and ammunition, they executed a daring nighttime breakout, cutting their way through the French lines and escaping into the mountains.
The French technically took the fort, but at an atrocious cost. They lost 2,000 veteran soldiers.
Yet, despite this fierce resistance, the unified front of the Haitian leadership begins to crumble under the relentless pressure of the French military machine.
The campaign of attrition took a heavy toll on the civilian population and the officer corps. In April 1802, several of Louverture's top generals, including Henri Christophe, negotiated separate surrenders with the French, integrating their troops into Leclerc's command.
Recognizing that his military coalition is fracturing, Louverture himself agrees to a cessation of hostilities in May.
Louverture agreed to retire to his plantation, relying on Leclerc's solemn public promise that slavery would not be reinstated.
But it was a calculated trap.
A few weeks later, French troops surround Louverture's home, arrest him, and immediately deport him and his family to France.
Yes. Toussaint Louverture, the brilliant architect of the Revolution, died roughly a year later from pneumonia and malnutrition in an unheated prison cell in the freezing Jura Mountains of France.
I have to question the conventional wisdom here, though. Napoleon and Leclerc clearly viewed the capture of Toussaint as a decisive victory. But did removing the pragmatic, diplomatic Louverture actually doom the French expedition?
How do you mean?
Well, did they just pave the way for the uncompromising Jean-Jacques Dessalines to take absolute control?
That is a very perceptive analysis. Louverture, despite his military brilliance, was fundamentally a statesman who consistently sought a negotiated framework where Saint-Domingue remained economically tied to France.
Right.
Dessalines possessed no such diplomatic restraint. When the French removed Louverture, they eliminated the last moderate voice.
So it changes the whole nature of the war.
Yes. The conflict rapidly devolved from a struggle for autonomy within the empire to a war of total, merciless eradication.
And the fragile peace brokered by Leclerc shatters almost immediately when Napoleon's true agenda is exposed.
In the summer of 1802, verified reports arrived in Saint-Domingue that the French government had officially reestablished slavery in the neighboring colony of Guadeloupe.
The deception was revealed.
Exactly. Right. The deception was revealed. The entire island immediately erupted into widespread, uncontainable violence.
And nature intervenes once again. The rainy season brings the return of yellow fever. General Leclerc contracts the disease and dies in November 1802.
Command of the French Expeditionary Force falls to the Vicomte de Rochambeau.
Rochambeau discarded any pretense of political negotiation. He viewed the conflict strictly as a race war and initiated a campaign of industrialized terror that bordered on genocidal.
The details of Rochambeau's tactics are profoundly disturbing. The sources detail how he imported thousands of attack dogs, specifically mastiffs from Cuba and Jamaica, that were deliberately starved and trained to hunt and devour black people.
He staged public spectacles in the arenas of colonial towns where these dogs were unleashed upon captured prisoners.
It was horrific. But Rochambeau also engaged in what can only be described as early mechanized extermination.
You were referring to the fumigational sulfurous baths.
Yes. Rochambeau ordered the holds of French naval vessels to be sealed. Captured Haitians were forced into the holds, and soldiers burned sulfur to create lethal sulfur dioxide gas.
Suffocating hundreds of people at a time before dumping their bodies into the ocean.
It was a methodical, chemical slaughter.
And Dessalines responds to this apocalyptic violence with equal brutality. When Rochambeau hanged 500 black prisoners of war outside the city of Le Cap, Dessalines immediately retaliated.
Dessalines ordered the execution of 500 white prisoners. He had them hanged in full view of the French lines, and their heads were severed and placed on pikes surrounding the city.
The conflict had abandoned all conventions of warfare. It was a contest of sheer survival.
And the geopolitical landscape shifts one final time to seal the fate of the French. In 1803, the brief peace between France and Great Britain collapses.
The British Royal Navy immediately imposes a total naval blockade on the French-held ports in Saint-Domingue.
This blockade was the death knell for Rochambeau's army. It severed their supply lines, preventing any reinforcements, ammunition, or food from arriving from France.
Trapped on the coast, decimated by yellow fever, and relentlessly besieged by Dessalines' growing army, the French position collapsed.
This culminates in the Battle of Vertières in November 1803.
Dessalines launched an immense coordinated assault against the heavily fortified French blockhouses surrounding Le Cap.
The Haitian troops, fighting with astonishing tenacity, overran the French defenses. Rochambeau, facing total annihilation, was forced to capitulate.
He chose to surrender to the British naval squadron, blockading the harbor, rather than face the vengeance of Dessalines.
The French evacuate. Napoleon's grand expeditionary force is utterly destroyed.
And on January 1st, 1804, Jean-Jacques Dessalines proclaims the independence of the new nation.
He permanently abolishes the colonial name of Saint-Domingue and renames the country Haiti, adopting the indigenous Arawak term for the island, meaning land of high mountains.
It was an unparalleled historical triumph. Haiti became the first independent nation in Latin America and the first modern state in the world to be founded by formerly enslaved people, explicitly established on the permanent abolition of slavery.
But the birth of the nation is accompanied by further bloodshed. Between February and April of 1804, Dessalines ordered the systematic massacre of the remaining white French population.
This was a deliberate, calculated campaign of political eradication. Dessalines traveled across the country to personally ensure his orders were executed.
His rationale was twofold: to exact vengeance for the sadistic atrocities committed by Rochambeau, and to permanently eliminate the possibility of a loyalist fifth column, a population within the country that could assist a future French invasion.
Thousands of men, women, and children were killed. Although it is a crucial detail that the massacre was specifically targeted at the French, he explicitly spared certain groups.
He issued exemptions for individuals he deemed non-threatening to the new republic. He spared foreign medical professionals, certain neutral merchants, German colonists who had settled there before the revolution, and most notably, the soldiers of the Polish legions.
The Polish defectors. This is such an incredible intersection of global histories. Napoleon had deployed over 5,000 Polish troops as part of Leclerc's expeditionary force.
The Polish soldiers were initially deployed to suppress the rebellion. However, once they arrived and witnessed the reality of the conflict, a profound ideological realization occurred.
Right.
The Poles had recently seen their own homeland partitioned and occupied by the empires of Russia, Prussia, and Austria. They realized that the enslaved Haitians were fighting a war of national liberation against a foreign occupying power, the exact same struggle the Poles were fighting in Europe.
Recognizing that shared struggle, a significant number of Polish soldiers defied French orders, defected, and joined Dessalines' army to fight for Haitian independence.
Their contribution was highly valued. Following the revolution, Dessalines bestowed upon the Polish veterans the title of the White Negroes of Europe.
In the context of a society that had just violently overthrown white supremacy, this was a profound honorific denoting ultimate solidarity.
Yes. The Polish soldiers were granted full Haitian citizenship in the new constitution and integrated into the society.
So Haiti is independent. The French are expelled. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, what exactly is the condition of the country they have just conquered?
The country was an absolute wasteland. The human toll was catastrophic. An estimated 200,000 Haitians had perished in the 12 years of conflict, alongside tens of thousands of European soldiers.
And the infrastructure of the country, the towns, the ports, the plantations, had been methodically reduced to ash by the scorched earth tactics utilized by both sides.
How does a new government rebuild an economy from literal ashes, especially when the only viable economic engine is agricultural export?
This is the tragic paradox of post-revolutionary Haiti. To secure the enormous revenues needed to purchase weapons and maintain a standing army to deter a second French invasion, Dessalines realized he had to restart the export economy immediately.
So what does he do?
He implemented a system known as capitalisme agraire, a militarized form of agricultural serfdom. He ordered the formerly enslaved population to return to the plantations as state laborers.
He legally bound them to the land, forbidding them from moving or changing professions.
The society was strictly bifurcated into two classes: the military who enforced order and the cultivators who worked the fields.
The whip was outlawed, but the sources note that military overseers simply used heavy vines to beat laborers who did not meet quotas. To the people working the fields, it must have felt uncomfortably close to the slavery they had just bled to destroy.
It generated immense resentment and deep social fracturing. The people had fought for liberty, which they interpreted as the right to own small parcels of land and practice subsistence farming.
But the state required them to engage in large-scale cash crop production to survive the geopolitical hostility of the world.
This tension ultimately led to Dessalines' assassination in 1806 by his own officers. And following his assassination, the country splits into two rival factions.
Yes. In the north, Henri Christophe, a former general under Louverture, established a kingdom.
Okay.
Christophe leaned heavily into militarization and forced labor, amassing vast state wealth and constructing monumental fortifications like the Citadelle La Ferrière to repel foreign invasions.
And in the south?
In the south, Alexandre Pétion established a republic. Pétion pursued a more liberal economic policy, breaking up the largest states and redistributing land to the veterans and citizens, which satisfied the desire for land ownership but severely crippled the republic's export economy.
It wasn't until 1820 that the northern and southern territories were reunified under the presidency of Jean-Pierre Boyer. But even unified, Haiti faced an existential blockade from the international community.
No major power would officially recognize their sovereignty.
And that diplomatic isolation was aggressively weaponized by France in 1825.
Under the restored Bourbon monarchy of King Charles X, France dispatched a heavily armed naval squadron to the harbor of Port-au-Prince. They delivered a devastating ultimatum.
They demanded reparations.
Yes. France demanded 150 million gold francs in exchange for official diplomatic recognition and the lifting of the economic embargo.
The French framed this extortion as compensation for the financial losses of the former planters.
Meaning they were demanding the Haitian people pay for the land they fought for and for their own bodies, which the French still considered lost property.
It is literal extortion at the barrel of a cannon. And Haiti, desperate to enter the global market and avoid another devastating war, accepts the terms. But they don't have 150 million gold francs sitting in a treasury.
To make the initial payments, the Haitian government was forced to borrow money from French banks at exorbitant predatory interest rates.
They essentially took out a huge mortgage on their own freedom, paying the banks to pay the French government.
The independence debt. It is a financial stranglehold. The sources state that Haiti did not finish paying off this debt and the associated interest until 1947.
For over a century, a huge percentage of their national revenue was siphoned directly back to their former oppressors, utterly crippling their ability to build schools, roads, or domestic industries.
It structurally impoverished the nation from its inception. Yet despite this calculated financial suffocation, the ideological and geopolitical impacts of the Haitian Revolution echoed across the world.
Let us trace those echoes, because the revolution fundamentally redrew the map of North America.
Quite literally. The destruction of Leclerc's army in Saint-Domingue convinced Napoleon that his ambition to build a vast slave-powered empire in the Americas was unviable.
Needing cash for his impending wars in Europe, Napoleon abandoned his New World strategy and abruptly sold the massive Louisiana territory to the United States in 1803.
So the Haitian resistance directly facilitated the geographical expansion of the United States.
But the United States government did not return the favor. President Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder who was terrified by the prospect of a successful Black republic, imposed a strict trade embargo on Haiti and actively campaigned to isolate the new nation diplomatically.
Jefferson and the Southern planter class correctly identified Haiti as an existential threat to the ideology of white supremacy and chattel slavery.
The mere existence of Haiti provided an ideological beacon for enslaved people everywhere.
And that fear materialized. The Haitian Revolution directly inspired rebellions, most notably the 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana, which was the largest slave revolt in United States history.
And Haiti didn't just passively inspire resistance, they actively exported their revolution.
Yes. The Haitian Constitution offered immediate asylum and citizenship to any runaway slave who reached their shores. Furthermore, they provided critical logistical and military support to Simon Bolivar.
When Bolivar's campaign to liberate South America from Spanish rule was failing, he sought refuge in Haiti.
And the Haitian government provided him with thousands of muskets, ammunition, and a safe harbor to rebuild his forces.
Their only condition was that Bolivar must immediately abolish slavery in every territory he liberated, a promise he largely kept.
So what does this all mean? When we look at the historiographical debate, there is a complex question regarding the ultimate legacy. Did the Haitian Revolution actually end the institution of slavery globally?
It did not end the practice immediately. Slavery expanded and flourished in the United States, in Brazil, and in Cuba for several decades following Haitian independence.
However, the revolution inflicted a fatal, irreversible psychological blow to the foundational logic of the transatlantic slave trade.
It destroyed the myth.
Exactly, precisely. The colonial powers had justified the brutal subjugation of millions of people through a curated myth of inherent racial hierarchy and natural submission.
And the Haitian Revolution violently shattered that mythology.
It proved definitively that enslaved people could organize complex military campaigns, navigate intricate geopolitical diplomacy, and decisively crush the most formidable professional armies in the world to secure their inherent human rights.
It leaves you pondering a profound and deeply unsettling paradox. The Haitian Revolution is a testament to the absolute limits of human endurance and the brilliance of the human spirit. They dismantled an unstoppable colonial machine and waded through decades of unimaginable violence to forge an entirely new reality.
Yet the aftermath exposes a dark, enduring reality regarding the mechanics of global power. When an oppressed people shatter their chains and defy the established order, the empires of the world do not simply concede.
They rewrite the rules of engagement.
Through coordinated naval blockades, absolute diplomatic isolation, and predatory financial extortion, the global powers ensured that the people of Haiti would be punished for their audacity. They forced them to pay an exorbitant, multi-generational price for their own liberation.
It forces you to confront a question that resonates from the ashes of 1804 all the way into the geopolitical realities of the present day. Does political independence truly exist if you are systematically denied economic sovereignty?
It is a question that the enduring history of Haiti demands we answer.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.